Information fueled.
Opinion driven.
This is Nashville's Morning News with Dan Mandis.
And so, my fellow Americans,
we talk news.
6:07, Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Good morning to your friends. How are you? Man, there is so much going on. By the way, Matthew Hurt is going to be joining us coming up here at 6:36 on Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. The fallout from Alex Thompson's comments at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. By the way, Joan, you missed all that fun and frivolity yesterday. But just a reminder as to what Alex Thompson said. This is the Axios reporter, real quick, because there's been a lot of reaction to it. The Axios reporter calling out his own industry and his own colleagues for lying to the American people. Remember this.
To my bones, I believe that reporting and the White House Correspondents Association is as necessary as ever. President Biden's decline and its cover-up by the people around him is a reminder that every White House, regardless of party, is capable of deception. But being truth tellers also means telling the truth about ourselves. We, myself included, missed a lot of this story, and some people trust us less because of it. We bear some responsibility for faith in the media being at such lows.
Actually,
some responsibility.
I was going to say, you actually bear all the responsibility, dude. I love I guess we better clap.
Yeah.
So that, of course, reverberated across the country because of this notion that the legacy or left-wing media isn't biased, which we all know that, of course, it is.
Yeah.
The idea that the media is not biased is as much of a lie as the claim that Biden was mentally competent, which clearly he wasn't.
I do agree with that assessment from Alex Thompson, who I understand won an award for writing a story months and perhaps years after the American people already knew that story to be true. Millions of Americans watched our mentally incompetent president struggle with his day-to-day duties of this office. We watched our country be ran into the ground as a result, and nobody in the media wanted to write about that, talk about it. There were many reporters, I will say, right-leaning reporters who did talk about that, who didn't get awards, didn't get coverage. In fact, they were lambasted for their coverage. And I remember being on President Trump's campaign, talking about Joe Biden's clear mental incompetence and being accused by people in this room of manufacturing deep fake videos, trying to persuade the public into not believing what they saw with their own eyes for many years. And I think it's about time the legacy media finally admits that was one of the greatest cover-ups and scandals that ever took place in American history, and certainly it did contribute to the decline in the trust that Americans have for the legacy media.
One of the greatest scandals in journalism history, I think, is what Caroline Leavitt said. I would agree with that. Would you agree with that, Joan? Is the cover-up of Joe Biden's mental decline one of the greatest scandals, one of the greatest cover-ups in history?
Absolutely.
I would agree with Caroline Leavitt, but there's so many. That's the thing, though, Joan. There's so many. There was, of course, that one. There is the Hunter Biden laptop.
Oh, yeah.
That literally impacted an election. And that changed the course of history.
Because 17% of voters said that they would have voted differently if they knew the truth about that story.
That's exactly right. And then Joe Biden gets in. We have the failed pullout of Afghanistan. That leads to Vladimir Putin going into Ukraine. The weak sanctions also encouraged Putin, in my opinion, to go into Ukraine. Joe Biden opened up the border. I mean, I could go on and on about how that story and that cover-up changed the course of human history. And so here's the thing about what Thompson said is he was right. We all know what happened, but some in the media, believe it or not, they continue to defend themselves. Chuck Todd, oh my Lord, host of Meet the Press now, he is reacting to all of this. He was on a podcast. Now, Chuck Todd, he was on, remind me, Joan, Chuck Todd was on, was it Meet the Press?
He was Meet the Press.
Meet the Press. And he got bounced off of Meet the Press. But listen to this.
This is not a media failure. This is a failure of the Democratic Party. And I just sort of the virtue signaling that some people have done to try to say that the media missed this story. They didn't miss this story. No. David Ignatius wrote, I just refuse to accept this stupid premise because it's a manufactured right-wing premise in order to stain the media. The media's got plenty of things to attack them for, and there are MSNBC and CNN and pundits that absolutely carried water for Joe Biden, but they're not journalists.
I'm so confused because literally a journalist at the White House Correspondents' Dinner talked about how they missed a story, which, by the way, I believe they lied. I went through all that yesterday. I believe they willingly lied.
Is such the wrong word for this story.
Correct.
They didn't miss. This was intentional.
It was intentional. They were lying. And everybody, they were gaslighting. Everybody knows that. So Todd now comes back and he says, oh, this is a right-wing propaganda. Well, if it's a right-wing narrative, then why did Alex Thompson, a journalist, and I'm air quoting because I really don't know much about him, but he said that we missed the story, again, air quoting, and everybody clapped. I think that they were sort of, they clapped out of, what's the right word? They felt like they had to clap, begrudgingly clapped. But here's the thing. If you want to blame the pundits, I would say to Chuck Todd, if you want to blame the pundits, well, the media puts these pundits on, and they did carry water for Joe Biden. There was no pushback or fact-checking when they said that Joe Biden was sharp as a tack. And by the way, the other thing that I would ask, where were all of these supposed journalists when Biden was clearly in decline? And I'll harken back to the Hunter Biden story. Zero journalistic curiosity or integrity. Nobody, remember the Wall Street Journal, they reported on Joe Biden's decline. The New York Post reported on the Hunter Biden laptop. Nobody in the mainstream media, no other media outlets picked up on the story and did their own investigation. No journalistic curiosity at all. It wasn't until, remember this, it wasn't until George Clooney wrote that opinion piece that the Democrats and the media finally admitted that something was amiss and they decided to make a move. But wait, there's a lot more to the hypocrisy and the idiocy that is what Chuck Todd had to say. Details straight ahead, 6:15. Time to check the roads on WTN. All right, so talking about Chuck Todd and what he had to say. Now, part of all of this is the fact that Chuck himself actually has talked about how the media, and I'm going to, again, air quote, missed this story. But remember, George Clooney writing that opinion piece that the Democrats and the media finally admitted something was wrong, and they did decide to make a move.
They're not journalists. They're former strategists that carried water for Joe Biden. The journalist, David Ignatius, wrote a very high-profile column in October of 23 saying, is he really running again? This doesn't seem like a good idea. People like me were promoting Dean Phillips' campaign because he was running.
Did you hear what he said? That last comment. He promoted Dean Phillips' campaign. As a journalist, Joan, because I'm not a journalist, I'm a talk show host, used to be. But when I used to be a journalist, I would not promote anyone's campaign.
Right.
What you do is you cover that story. You cover that campaign as a news story. You don't promote a campaign, right?
That's generally the rule.
Okay, very good. Here's more from Chuck Todd.
This is an attempt by some to virtue signal, and it's this horrible sort of pitting different news organizations against each other, when ultimately the people at fault are Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Jill Biden, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, every elected member of Congress.
Wow. So he's trying to completely clear the media of ignoring this story about Joe Biden's mental decline. Now, first of all, when he says every elected member of Congress, I'm sorry, but no up, Chuck. The Republicans were sounding the alarm, as were Republican talk show hosts, conservative talk show hosts, and so forth. So Republicans were on this. Conservatives were on this. It was, and this is part of the story, the Democrats and the media chose to completely ignore the story. Second point, and again, the whole the president sharp as a tack thing, where, you know, everybody clearly, you know, got their talking points, and the president was sharp as a tack. And I think that was one of those moments where you look back and it is just, it's hilarious. And we all were playing the audio. Joe Biden is sharp as a tack, what all the media outlets were saying. Everybody had the same talking points. And then we'd play audio of Joe Biden clearly not sharp as a tack. So it does seem like Chuck Todd is virtue signaling himself. Second point, he seems to have changed his mind on all of this, because I want you to remember a while back, and Joan, I think you were with us at this time, when he actually did say that journalists were indeed carrying the water for Joe Biden. This is Chuck Todd when he was on with Piers Morgan. Clearly, he has changed his tune.
Look, we were subtle. He's using the back staircase. He's not using the front staircase. Hey, he's not doing any interviews. So there was this reluctance to draw the conclusion to say, is he not doing this? And that I agree with. That was held back a lot.
Now, let me ask you a question. So you have a president of the United States, the leader of the free world, and you're talking about being subtle? Why in the world would you be subtle if the president of the United States and the leader of the free world is showing clear signs of mental decline? I think that is a valid point to ask. And here's more from Chuck Todd again. This is when he was on Piers Morgan, which was months ago, where he did call out the media for ignoring the mental decline of Joe Biden, which, again, clearly he has changed his tune over the last couple of months.
The only thing I can chalk it up to is this, whatever you want to call it, this fear that some members of the media had sometimes, that they would be perceived as helping Trump if they somehow diminished Biden, right? That it was some sort of zero-sum game. Mm-hmm. And I think this has been the fundamental mistake that many members of the traditional press have done.
So there you go. So, I mean, you can tell the difference between when he was on Piers Morgan, where he was saying, yeah, the media, you know, maybe one of the things that they were cognizant of is they didn't want to be seen as helping Trump. Well, all right, he said that back when it was on Piers Morgan months ago. Now he is out there saying, oh, no, this wasn't a failure of the media. This was a failure of the Democrats. And he started naming off all of these Democrats within the party. So I don't know if maybe Upchuck there, Chuck Todd, I don't know if it's that he needs a gig now. So he doesn't want to go out and start bashing the people that he is sending resumes to. But clearly, he has changed his tune. He was right the first time. Now, as he is trying to defend the media, really, it does, in my opinion, simply just comes off as tone deaf. It is 6:21 on Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. By the way, the Super Text line is open, 615-737-9986, 615-737-WWTN. Joan, what's coming up in the news at 6:30?
We'll talk about a sad story out of Springfield, Illinois, after a car drove through an after-school program, the building there. Details on what happened in that story coming up here at 6:30 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.